So obviously one of the more talked about free agent signings that we've ever seen, to be honest, was Saquon Barkley deciding to join the Philadelphia Eagles. Now they're playing for the Lombardi Trophy, and many people have talked about, should the Giants have let him go? And in fact, usually it's met with a absolutely not, and usually said in the way of, why did the Giants even let him go? But I like to dive a little bit more deep into some of these topics. It would be very easy to say, yes, you let go a MVP candidate who's now playing in a Super Bowl. That's not good, and you didn't even get anything for him. But let's dive into it a little bit deeper, because I think there is some nuance here that often gets missed, as what tends to happen with this kind of thing. So first, I'm only going to show one play, and then we're going to mostly go to charts. But this is if you're making a counter argument for why Saquon Barkley maybe isn't as valuable as you might think, this would be that counter argument. Watch how when Hurts gives the ball to Saquon, there is, really no even threat of him getting tackled until he gets to this point. Now, this is the point where Saquon Barkley makes his contract, right? And then some. This is where he's been great this season. Once he gets to the next level, watch as he's just going to make a guy miss, and he's able to get all the way into the end zone for a touchdown. So that's essentially the argument, if you're a Giants fan, is to say, we didn't give Saquon those opportunities. We're not getting him clean to the next level too often with our offensive line. Sure, he's going to be better in Philadelphia, who gives him those opportunities, where he's then able to take advantage of those opportunities and put together MVP caliber numbers at the running back position. I think that's part one. Let's get into some numbers, because there are some stats to try and measure how valuable players are, and they can be a little bit shaky. So for example, this right here, PFF has a stat called PFF WAR, which I actually think is a pretty good stat, but running backs are always incredibly low. You see that Saquon Barkley in 2022, for example, he was the 15th highest graded running back, but just had a WAR, or wins above replacement, at 0.22, which feels very low, right? Obviously, Saquon Barkley in his best season was better than that. Of course, this is not factoring in this most recent season. I don't have the data for that. I only had the data prior to him being a free agent, but hey, that's also what the Giants had when they made the decision if they should let him go or re-sign him. Then I decided to make this chart, because I know PFF isn't everyone's cup of tea. A lot of people just kind of write off anything PFF, so okay, let's use something not PFF. This is EPA. So there's a stat called EPA per play, and then you can calculate it to total EPA. It's essentially estimated points added. This is a really simple stat, actually. It's where were you at prior to the play? Game situation, how many points were you expected to get on that drive? After that play, did it go up or did it go down, and by how much? So this is the Giants rushing total EPA when Saquon Barkley took the snap. I calculated it to a WAR, so he's at 0.58 wins above replacement. And keep in mind, this is the entire rushing. So this is giving credit to the offensive line and the running back together, not just Saquon Barkley. So again, might feel like a bit of a low number. But I wanted to get a little bit more deeper into just that. So, okay, you could argue that the most a running back's value is 0.6 of a win, which is still valuable and still a great contract, but maybe not, MVP level player. But I thought there's maybe better ways that we can look at this. So what I then decided to do was look at Saquon Barkley's difference I should say the Eagles' rushing game difference from last year to this year, which isn't fully fair to do for a number of reasons, but I just wanted to check it out. And as you see, the difference from where they were at last year to what Saquon Barkley brought this year is a bit of a jump. It's actually, we're now talking nearly 2/3 of a win. So still nothing that you would say is MVP caliber. Quarterbacks can get 4 or 5 wins added to their team, but still an incredibly valuable player and certainly worth the contract. And it's worth mentioning, a great running back does far more than just impact the running game. And I'm not even talking about pass blocking or catching. I'm legitimately talking about the threat of the running back. So this chart, for example, Jalen Hurts, I wanted to see his play action numbers from this year and last season. In 2024, so this season, his play action stats, he's better when there's play action. I mean, his passer rating goes up 14 points. His PFF grade goes up about 5.5 points. So definitely has a jump there. Whereas in 2023, with no Saquon Barkley, his passer rating was actually worse when they ran play action. And now you see that the PFF grade, interestingly enough, was actually better when they ran play action. So he was better when they ran play action, but the overall team wasn't a huge jump, and 5 points can easily be explained as luck. But definitely we do see a jump when they run play action this year. Now, here's where things get weird. We're like, okay, you could sit here and say, oh, well, clearly Saquon Barkley is responsible for all of that, but there's always going to be other differences year in and year out, right? Like, for example, they had a new offensive coordinator. Is it possible Kellen Moore is responsible for some of this? Clearly, part of that pie belongs to Saquon Barkley, but is it 100% of it? You know, people who say, oh, running backs are super important will say yes. Is it 1% of it? People who say running backs aren't super important will say yes. The reality is we kind of don't know. All we can do is I think come up with educated guesses. But I also want to look at Daniel Jones' numbers, right? Because at the end of the day, this video is not should the Eagles have signed Saquon Barkley. They seem to be pretty happy with that decision. The question is, should the Giants have kept him? And you see Daniel Jones' numbers, there's actually a pretty, again, if it's only one instance and you can't really come to any conclusions off of one instance, but it's a pretty powerful instance to make a point that running backs matter, because you see in 2024, Jones was definitely passer rating wise better when they were running play action, almost 10 points better passer rating. The PFF grade, again, actually lower when they ran play action. Kind of interesting how sometimes that flips, but still better. The Giants were better in 2024 when Daniel Jones was quarterback and they ran play action. You look at 2023, it's not just better, it's like massively better. When they didn't run play action in 2023, a passer rating of 62, and when they did, it was actually a good 93 passer rating. That's a ridiculous jump. Also 20 points in terms of PFF grades. So, like, again, if you want to make the argument that Saquon Barkley was the entirety of that, there is some evidence here. Ultimately, for me, kind of the way I view this is, so how valuable is a running game in general? To me, it's pretty valuable because, well, it's unlikely to be the only way you win a game. Usually your quarterback's going to have to make plays. You're going to have to make plays down the field. I do think with the kind of new school football approach of playing so many two safety deep coverages, having a running game, it just gives you another tool in the tool belt, right? And it allows you to move the ball down the field. It allows you to take teams out of certain coverages and avoid obvious passing situations, which is super valuable. So to me, the strategy aspect of it is, I think, the most valuable part of having a good running back. And if you have a good running back, you can afford to to carry the ball more because of that, right? But I would still say that, in my opinion, when you're trying to build an offense, the most important thing still is a passing game. And I don't think that's a controversial opinion, right? I think passing game tends to be a lot more valuable, and usually all you need is a decent enough running game to make something work. And I think kind of viewing running back as the final piece of the puzzle is probably how I would view building an offense. So should the Giants have re-signed Saquon Barkley? Well, first let's look at the contract that the Eagles are working with here. So you see where it is, a lot to look at, sorry about that, but I think the biggest thing to look at would be the number all the way towards the right. That is the cap hit year in and year out. Interestingly enough, the way the Eagles have restructured this, the biggest cap hit is going to be 2027 when he will not be playing. That's kind of how the Eagles have done this, is they're completely kicking the can down the road. So that's what you'd be looking at if you're the Giants ultimately. $13.5 million a year for 2 more years after this one. And I think the question the Giants have to ask themselves is, would that make their situation better? I mean, you have a good player, so that should help. And so on paper, you could say yes, but let's keep in mind where we're at. Let's say a good running back is worth a win. I don't think that's a crazy number. In fact, that feels about right for me for an elite running back. It's worth 1 win. I know some people will say that's more, but looking at the data we've shown, that's kind of where I would put it. This is where the Giants were in the draft this year. You see that they were the third overall. They had the third overall pick, and they were one great Drew Lock performance away from having the first overall pick. So that's where they're at. This is where they would have been if you added an extra win. They'd now fall to 6th. So right off the bat, you're hurting your team by having Saquon Barkley. You get Saquon Barkley, and that's very good, but you are hurting the team in terms of, you don't get to add more draft capital. So there is a give and take. And of course, this is 3 picks back in every single draft, right? Or I guess 4 picks back in every single draft, or every single round is what I mean to say, not just the first round. I think the question the Giants have to ask themselves is, after this contract is up for Saquon Barkley, he will be 30 years old. That's after 2 years. Do the Giants think they will be competitive enough in that time frame? And is it better to maybe just try and get a little worse so that way you can get a little better, get the draft picks there? I don't think it's crazy. Honestly, I don't think either decision would have been a crazy one for them. I think a lot of people will argue as well they should have traded him and gotten some value back as opposed to just letting him walk. It's worth mentioning, the Titans tried that with Derrick Henry. They couldn't even get a second-round pick. The Ravens weren't willing to give up a second-round pick, and that would have been a late second-round pick. So they probably would have had to settle for a third-round pick, I would assume, if the Giants wanted to get rid of Saquon Barkley. Sure, that's value. I'd rather have a third-round pick than nothing. Probably what they should have done. But, it's not like they missed out on, a first-round pick if they would have. Although the other argument is, had they traded him, they could have at least made sure they traded him out of the division, so you don't have to deal with playing him twice a year and deal with now you have to try and beat the Eagles if you want to win the division. That's probably what they should have done. They probably should have traded him as opposed to letting him walk. But ultimately, I don't think it's a disaster move. They needed to get worse, and by the time that they're good, the odds are Saquon Barkley won't be good anymore. It could change. Sometimes there are exceptions to the rule, but just you got to, assume that the rule will happen in these situations. So I don't really hate what the Giants did. I think they should have probably traded him, but that's also a bit of hindsight being 2020. And again, it's worth mentioning, Saquon's never had a season like this. He's also stayed healthy. He has a career high in snaps this season, so he's only had really 2 years where he stayed healthy for the entirety of the year. So it's kind of worked out that way for Philadelphia as well. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on all of this. What do you think? I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Do you think the Giants should have kept him? There's also the business side of things. You can sell more jerseys and stuff like that, right? But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.